As explained, it's of course nice to bind to already existing properties, but it really gets clear once you write your own bindings. So I will create a new component for this, and I'll navigate into the data binding folder because I want to create it there. Then I use ng c for create, or g for generate, c for component, and then I will name it property binding with a dash, make it flat so that it stays in the same folder, and also I want to have inline template and inline styles. So this creates two new files. I'll get rid of the test file, and here is my property binding component. Now let's say I don't want to output property binding works here, but instead what I want to output here is a value I get passed in from outside. Now I could do this using ng content like you learned before, but here's another technique. And of course you can not only pass content you want to output, but content you want to use anywhere in your application, as you might be aware. So here I will first get rid of this stuff here again. And then I want to output with string interpolation a property named result, which I will define here. And result should be a number. It's, let's say, 0 at the beginning. Now I want to set result from outside though. So I will add input metadata and import input from Angular core. And this will make this result property bindable from outside. So now I will go to the data binding component, or to the HTML code property binding, and I will add another headline here, call it custom property binding. Now below this custom property binding, I will add FA property binding, which is the selector of this property binding component. And notice how Angular CLI automatically transformed property dash binding into property binding camel case class name. So I'm importing this. Of course, now also adding the directives metadata and the property binding component, which has to be imported, of course, and also get rid of onInit here. So import property binding component from the property binding component here. And now you see that 0 here, of course, because it is set to 0 initially, right? We set this here. However, by adding input, this property can be bound from outside of this component. So I can go to my data binding component into the HTML template and add something to that selector. I'll add brackets because we're talking about property binding, and this is the syntax which tells AngularQ that property binding is in place. And then result is the name of the property I want to bind to. I'll set result to 10, and now if this reloads, you see that we get 10 here because we're now binding to that property from outside. We're passing the data, which should be shown there, from outside into that component.